Welcome to the studio. Deborah Threadgold, Country General Manager for IBM Ireland. After a long career, I think, with IBM in various leadership roles, we're delighted to have you here today. Thanks so much for being with us.
And I'm delighted to be here. Thank you for having me.
Good. So what we often try to do is look a little bit at the person, behind the leader. So I'd love if you would start by telling us a little bit about your journey to now. Where did you start and how did you end up where you are now?
Oh my gosh, so maybe I'll start now and then I'll go back and put a little bit of context on it. So I have been the Country General Manager for IBM in Ireland for 3 years. I can't believe how quickly it has gone. And actually, I've been in IBM over 25 years,
Wow.
Which slightly horrifies me when I think about it. But when I joined IBM all those years ago, never in a million years did I imagine that I would come back to Ireland and be the General Manager. So I have to say, I feel very privileged every day of the week to do the job that I do. But the context of where I came from, I grew up in Dublin, great family, but a family where nobody had ever gone to university. So that wasn't something that was particularly on my agenda. I was fairly academic, did okay at school, went to secondary school. 16 I left school, not early, just happened to be 16 when I left. Got distracted in my last year, the big one, and did a fairly average leaving. And as a result of that, my parents sent me off into a secretarial course. So at the age of 18, if I was even 18, my very first job in Dublin was as a receptionist in a very small company. And a friend of mine, 1 year into that, nudged me and said, "What are you doing? It's time to go and do something that you're more capable of." So I signed up to go to college and I started studying marketing. Marketing because I didn't know what else to study. And during that, I went off to London and got myself a few jobs. I'd worked in a few companies in Dublin at this stage. And when I went to London, I was very fortunate to come across a small not-for-profit company, a pensions company. And when I got there, I came in for an awful hard time. Nothing to do with the accent or what I was up to, but I came in for a hard time because people felt I couldn't do the job I was there to do, which was marketing in a pensions company, because I didn't have any background in financial services. So I studied pensions for 3 years just to show them I could do it. And that caught the attention of the CEO. And so he offered me a role in his department and he sponsored me to do an MBA, which is something I actually over the years had grown to really want to do. So I was very blessed with that opportunity. And as I was studying my MBA, IBM came in to put in a new pensions management system in this company. And I was asked to be the interface. And so within a few months of working with IBM, they asked me would I like to come and work for them, which I did. But I actually moved back to Ireland and I joined IBM in Ireland back in the late 90s. Boy, did that open my eyes. I had never worked for a company, a multinational company. I just couldn't believe the opportunities in front of me. They sent me off to New York to train. It really was magnificent. And I loved being a consultant because I got to meet clients, I got to work on different projects. It was fascinating. But a couple of years into that, I was asked if I would like to take on a managerial role, which I initially wanted to say no to, but thank goodness for mentors. So my mentor said, "Listen, you're not going to get offered a managerial role in IBM just like that, so you got to take it when it comes." And I did. And then I learned something about myself because I joined a leadership team for IBM in Ireland where I was the only woman on the team. I was quite a bit younger than most of the people on the team, and I just have a huge curiosity for what goes on in the business. So that was the most amazing experience. I had a $1 million P&L. I was never going to make the company go broke, but I learned lots of lessons. And then I went on from role to role through IBM. I went out to the digital center, started working with international teams, set up sales teams, moved to the UK, got married, had 3 kids, again, loads of different roles in between my maternity leaves. And I was very lucky, very fortunate that there were always new jobs to go to, new opportunities, new learnings, which is really, really important because I can't say I set out thinking I was going to spend 25 plus years in IBM. Anyway, here I am 25 years later. When the opportunity came up to come back to Ireland, I was interviewed by our general manager in UKI and he said, "What about it? Will you go back and lead Ireland?" And at first I kind of slightly hesitated and then went, what am I hesitating for? This has got to be the dream job. So I came back 3 years ago and it's been an amazing time. I mean, I came back when we were coming out of COVID. So the workforce were just coming back. My first introduction to the team was a 7-minute video camera to everybody in Ireland. We started coming back to the office. Now we're operating hybrid working. We've spun off a company since I've been here. We've divested a company. hybrid cloud, AI. It's just so exciting. It's so diverse. And I just think it's a real honour to continue to work in Ireland and to continue the investment that IBM brings into Ireland. It's really an amazing opportunity.
Yeah, it's funny, I've been writing and talking to tech leaders for years, and IBM is such a long time in Ireland, such a part of Ireland. So I was fascinated to meet yourself. We bumped into each other, I think, after the pandemic. I suppose in that context, you've had various leadership roles via things like, I think you were Chief Digital Officer, maybe IBM's first Chief Digital Officer?
I was, yeah.
Am I right? And roles like that, and now country general manager here. I'd love to get your thoughts on leadership and what in your view a good leader looks like.
Leadership, yeah.
I know it's a big one.
I think it's changed so much. I think back to when I started my career, and maybe it was all a little bit more kind of pushy and directive and loud. And I think there's been a real appreciation over the years for leaders who listen, who are empathetic, who are very people orientated. So I think that's been a real kind of big evolution in leadership. I was reading an article in the Harvard Business Review actually last week, and they were talking about 5 key attributes of leaders. And they were talking about a leader is a person who can inspire a team, who brings consistency into that messaging, who looks at their team but understands that they're individuals within that team, and who listens to them and who gives feedback. But I think all of those attributes are so important. But the feedback, for example, it works every way. Giving feedbacks from leaders to people, it's as important to get feedback from employees into leaders. Consistency is so important, and listening, because who absolutely has all of the answers? So I was really intrigued by that, and I really recognised a lot. I myself would consider myself to be just naturally a very collaborative person. I genuinely like working with people. I love working with teams of people, and I do believe that diversity of thought brings much better solutions and much better outcomes. That for me is really, really important. Listening, being empathetic, being collaborative, and I must say I really enjoy that part of the job.
I love that idea that leadership has changed. That I agree entirely, by the way. I think it'll only continue to go that way. I really hope I'm right, and I hope you're right about it as well. So just coming back to IBM, where do you start? It's such an enormous organisation globally. But tell me a little bit about, I suppose, what excites you about IBM nowadays, and the various sort of areas that it's in, and then maybe Ireland's role within that enormous organisation.
Yeah, so gosh, IBM, 115 years plus. So I always say what's magnificent about IBM is that companies don't last that long, particularly in an environment that we're in, an industry that is so fast-paced in terms of how it changes. It doesn't survive, never mind thrive, unless it's capable of changing. So that's something that I'll come back to in terms of IBM in Ireland and how we've adopted that as well. But right now, IBM is a hybrid cloud and AI company, and we've had that strategy, so consistency, since 2020 when our CEO, Arvind Krishna, took to the helm. And just before that, in 2019, IBM acquired the Red Hat company, and Arvind himself was massively instrumental in that. And it just makes so much sense because Red Hat has obviously, such a great capacity around open source, and actually so had IBM, maybe lesser known. But with our industry capability and our reach into different markets and different geographies, the coming together of those two companies, and I think at the time it was the biggest technology acquisition there had been in history, but bringing them together enabled us to create a platform for businesses at a time when they were really looking to change their business and shift their business onto cloud. Now what we see are lots and lots of businesses who are working on many public clouds, building their own private clouds, still keeping their business on-prem, but they have this great need as well to be able to move their workloads around from one to the other without incurring massive costs, doing it safely, of course. And that's exactly what IBM's hybrid cloud platform can do because we partnered up with Red Hat. But interestingly enough, going back to the history of IBM, we have always been a business-to-business company. And one of the things that's interesting is that we're probably not best known amongst consumers, perhaps not as well known as some of our partners and our competitors. But what most people don't realize is that their daily interactions often brings them in touch with IBM technology, and they're not so much aware of that. So the barcode in supermarkets, for example, that was invented by IBM. The magnetic strip on the back of security cards, that was invented by IBM. You know, laser eye surgery, smartphones, the whole lot. So, you know, it's really, really interesting. But I'll come back onto that point of change. So IBM, for me, what still continues to inspire me is that, yes, we've got great technology. Yes, we're a research and development company. But this ability to keep on changing and reinventing ourselves is intriguing. And here in Ireland, we actually describe ourselves as a microcosm of the IBM corporation. And the reason we do that is if you look across everything we do in Ireland, it's wholly reflective of the IBM corporation. I think we're the only country outside of HQ that actually looks like that. So we started out in Ireland in 1956. 3 people set up IBM Ireland. And then if you fast forward into the 90s, we built the big technology campus that we now occupy out in Mulhuddard. And that's because we were manufacturing hardware at that stage. But then roll forward another decade, and we'd moved away from manufacturing, and we were in the world of cloud and software. And so looking at us today, we've built a research lab. So we're only one of 12 research labs for IBM across the world. We are now 12 years old and the only one inside the EU. So it's fantastic. And co-located with that is our software development labs. Then we have our digital organization. We have our consulting service delivery organization. We have treasury, we have legal, and lots of back office functions. So I suppose the key message here really is that the reason IBM Ireland has remained such a strategic location for the IBM Corporation is because as IBM changes its strategy and as our market and the demands from our market change, so too has IBM Ireland. And that's what's really fascinating.
How big is IBM in Ireland now?
We're about 2,500 people now. Okay. So, but I will say, I think I mentioned at the beginning, so when I came back, it was slightly larger, not my fault. We divested a business, we spun off a business, but you know, we continue to grow and sometimes shrink back a little bit depending on what the strategy is.
Yeah. Yeah, fantastic. And I suppose, you know, it comes up in every conversation at the moment, but I mean, IBM has such a track record in it, you know, that whole area of artificial intelligence and particularly generative AI. But the thing that I find really interesting about IBM is the deep look into the governance of AI that you guys have going on. Talk to me a little bit about that.
Okay, so, well, I mean, AI, wow. First of all, if we look back, right, 2023, what a year for artificial intelligence. And you're absolutely right, Anne. So IBM has been working with AI for many, many decades. And, you know, when I look back at last year, it makes me think back to 2010, because in 2010, IBM pitched an IBM machine with AI up against some of the best quiz masters in the world on the Jeopardy program in the US, and the machine won. But what's really curious about it is when that happened, we didn't see this huge reaction from consumers, and we most certainly didn't see a big reaction from business. So, and if you look back at 2023, when OpenAI launched ChatGPT and we saw lots of other AI providers, all of a sudden there was this massive inflection point in the market, and we saw a huge response. So it just shows that we weren't actually ready for artificial intelligence many, many years ago. From an IBM perspective, because we are business to business, you know, we've created our What's the Next Data and AI platform because we are catering for businesses, and that's a platform that is open and trusted and targeted and empowering. And what we've actually done is looked at the components that are critical to businesses. So the data piece, the AI tools themselves, but also, as you mentioned, the governance. So we have the store for the data warehouse with the data lake flexibility. We have the studio where we put in our foundational models, generative AI, our large language models. But the governance piece is really interesting because that's the toolkit that enables businesses to deploy AI across their workflows, but to do it in a way that is responsible and is trusted. And that's absolutely key. And IBM has massive confidence in the governance of our AI models and the foundation models because they are built on the largest known repository of enterprise data that has been tested and tried against for safety and legal concerns, and it's fully auditable in terms of the data. So we're very confident about that component. But you know, while we're talking about AI, we talk a lot about the technology, but I suppose what's been fascinating for me is if you listen to what's going on in the market, and so AI has promised businesses this exponential business value. It talks about scaling and amplifying productivity, which is fantastic, but that's so much more than just the technology. And we in IBM talk about plus AI, and then moving to AI plus. And what we mean by that is, if you look at when AI sort of came to attention in the market, there were many applications already where we were starting to see AI come into them. And so that was adding a little bit of AI. And we see that in all of the portals we interact with, with shops and what have you every day. Now we're into a situation where the AI itself, the technology in many ways is leading the disruption and it's leading the massive change. So that's AI plus. And so I was reading an article where the World Economic Forum was talking about the fact that we're going to see something like 85 million roles across the world disrupted in the next couple of years, and up to 97 new roles being created. And what they will all be, we don't actually know. But there's some really important points in that, because organizations need to know, how am I going to make that strategic change with AI? Simply putting AI on top of an existing process is not going to make things better. It's about understanding the use cases that are of strategic value to the company. So whether it's HR, whether it's supply chain, whether it's code conversion, financial management systems, that's something that we're very focused on, is creating those use cases so organizations can help it. And the other thing I would just say, which is also fascinating around AI, we did a survey last year with CEOs around the world across every industry. And 94% of those CEOs said that they would expect to be re-educating and upskilling up to 40% of their employees over the next 2 to 3 years, all driven by these technologies, by AI and by automated intelligence. So there's just so much work for us to do.
Yeah, no, and it's interesting that I remember seeing that piece of research. The reskilling
That's right,
side is going to be so important, isn't it? Because roles are going to change. I mean, there's no question about it, and they have, many of them have changed already. Just as regards sort of generative AI and ethics and regulation, just your thoughts on that as well. I mean, you've touched on it really with what's an X governance, etc.
Well, there's the what's an X governance piece, which is really important, and that's the platform. But maybe what's of interest is to look a little bit at what IBM does, because I can always say hand on heart that ethics and transparency, they're key parts of what IBM does. And I would even go so far as to say it's embedded into our culture and our DNA. And so apart from the platform, and bearing in mind, I mean, we've seen all these information in the news, we're hearing about AI and potential issues around copyright breach, and we're hearing about hallucinations, and let's not forget that we've seen the EU AI Act coming in, and we also, and it strikes me, we are moving more and more towards a regulatory environment. I mean, just look at DORA coming in, just look at CSRD come in. So within IBM, we take all this incredibly seriously. And so one of the things we do around AI is we have 5 principles that we adhere to. So it's explainability, robustness, fairness, privacy, and transparency. And where that becomes really, really relevant is that we have over time evolved an AI ethics board. And that board is made up of diverse stakeholders all across the corporation from different divisions. And it's their job to look at the technology we're building, the technology that we're deploying out to customers, the products, and the technology that we deploy internally ourselves as well, to ensure that we are consistently adhering to those ethics. So the ethical framework in IBM is really very significant and has evolved over time, but it's fascinating.
And you guys support regulation, I'm assuming, of...
Absolutely. I mean, we would be big supporters of regulation. I think Arvind himself has been in Washington supporting all of that. And we talk a lot about, if you're a creator of AI, you have to be accountable for the AI. But I suppose the other thing we will say is that, regulation is fantastic where it's needed, probably should be more relevant to the use cases rather than just the technology itself. And the reason we say that is because too much regulation is going to absolutely stifle and inhibit innovation, and that would be such a sad loss if we were to do that.
Yeah, I think the use case point is really well made. Like, if it's targeted that way, then it shouldn't stifle the innovation quite so much, and it should keep us all a lot safer, I would hope, as well. But and I suppose, again, when I'm talking to you and talking to IBM, we have to talk about quantum and the potential for quantum. Again, it's an area that IBM is so active in. Tell me a little bit about quantum and IBM.
So quantum, why is quantum so important? It's an emerging technology, so it's not actually fully here yet. But quantum is really important because it actually has the power and the capability to solve some of the big challenges that we have in our world today that classical computing basically can't do. And let me give you some examples. So quantum can look at better materials to go into batteries for electric cars, for example, and that's a huge topic for all of us across the world. It also can help us to identify new drugs to help to cure certain diseases. So it's really, really powerful. From an IBM perspective, what we've been doing is building out this quantum ecosystem, this global ecosystem. So we first put quantum on the cloud back in 2016. And since then, we have built out this ecosystem of 20 quantum systems. And what that means is that on any given day, up to 450,000 registered quantum users can access quantum across multiple industries in whatever part of the world that they're in. So I suppose the key thing here is that while we're still at emerging technology stage, IBM are leading the way in terms of giving accessibility and reliability and scalability to quantum. But last year, I was delighted because the Irish government sent a delegation over to our research headquarters in New York. So we had an opportunity to show them System 1. We were in the middle of building System 2, but we had some great conversations around what is quantum all about, what is the opportunity, what is this going to mean for industries in Ireland? And so I was personally delighted to see that at the end of last year, the Irish government produced their own quantum strategy paper, and that's fantastic. But in terms of where are we on quantum, so we are in what we call the quantum utility era, and in its most simplest sense, that is where we are seeing very specific use cases where quantum is absolutely outperforming classical computing. So we're now really looking down the road to when are we going to see quantum come into production. And that's where we're very focused here in Ireland, because there's two things we need to look at. First of all, how much use is technology really without anybody who knows how to deploy it? So we're looking at how we build out the skills ecosystem. So last year, we were delighted to be supported by the IDA. And we partnered with Trinity and UCD, and we created a pre-doc program. So now we're working with 35 people who are going to develop these tremendous skills in quantum. But the second thing, and really importantly, is that we also in that ecosystem have brought in some industry partners. Companies who understand the challenges they face today, but the challenges that they will face into the future. So those students get to work on real life industry use cases. And the important point here is that when quantum does come into production in the next 2 to 3 years, we are really ready to take advantage of that.
Yeah, I was fascinated when that was launched, the program with Trinity and IBM. I think I was actually at the launch. Because, yeah, the skills gap is going to be the fear because it's not there yet.
Yeah, but I tell you, there's an awful lot of interest. So, you know, there's hardly a client that when I go out to talk to them that isn't saying, tell me a little bit about quantum. And by the way, tell me a little bit about quantum safe, because the speed with which quantum is moving means that we're also looking at the algorithms that will help, in some ways, protect us from some of the capabilities of quantum.
Yeah, like all technology, I suppose
absolutely.
You need to always
the good
be
bits
looking
and the
at
not so good bits.
at the risks as well as the advantages. Now our partners in the series are IDA. You just mentioned them there. Tell me a little bit, I suppose, about apart from the traditional support that you'd have got when you years ago. What are the sort of ways you work with IDA these days?
Yeah, so. Look, the IDA is a tremendous partner. We've worked together for a very long time. I mentioned we came into Ireland in 1956, and if I reflect upon where IDA and IBM are very visible together, it's normally when we're making the big announcements, it's normally when we're bringing out some new innovation, and that's terrific. But actually, where the partnership is really enduring is what's happening in the background. And just by way of some examples, we talked about the fact that we pivot our strategy, we pivot our focus and our missions in a fairly regular basis. And so we absolutely rely on the IDA to support us in upskilling our people, bringing in those new skills with their training grants. So that's a really practical way of how they really help organisations like ourselves. But then also because we are a research and development company. And so we're always looking at scientific discoveries and how we can accelerate that to commercial opportunity. So, we're looking at quantum, we're looking at AI, and what the IDA support us there with is feasibility study grants. And what's really interesting is I think our relationship has deepened so much over the years because of how much we work together that it's almost like they are predicting where we're going next. So they always are able to come with us with the programs that can support us through that journey. So, as I said, it's been an enduring partnership. They are fantastic to work with. And honestly, in terms of really putting the stamp on how important Ireland is in the IBM portfolio and how we can continue to invest in that, then the IDA absolutely are a key part of that.
And I suppose in your sector, you know, if we're, you know, we've talked a little bit about quantum and AI, but are there other trends that are going to be important in coming years or in the coming year?
Do you know, I think, to be completely fair, we have a lot on our hands with AI. So I think we're going to see, you know, we really are in the early stages. And I mentioned about this strategic, this AI plus. I think we're going to see in the next year or two organisations who are really leading the way, really taking strategic advantage of what the technology can do. I think the governance piece, and you brought it up, Anne, is so critical. I mean, with all this new legislation, but in terms of protecting our data, protecting our organisations, protecting our brands, protecting society, governance is going to be so important. I think we're going to see roles and people working with AI or using AI in their jobs, they're absolutely going to start to replace those that don't. And I think that comes back onto the skills point again. So, you know, I say to people when we talk about AI, you know, if you're not in a world where you're using AI, don't be afraid, get out there and try it. There's lots of education. I mean, of course, I'm going to say IBM offers a free training platform called Skills Build, which anybody can access. So there's an opportunity to really get your hands around the basic skills. But I think that's going to be a big push for us this year. So seeing businesses moving forward, absolutely on the governance and skills.
Deborah Threadgold, it has been an absolute pleasure to have you here in the studio with us today, and we must do it again soon. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, well, thank you so much for having me. I've really enjoyed myself. Thank you.